thrilled to be with you here. And also, I'm here with three very prominent political parties in our area. We have the Republican Party present, the Democratic Party, and the Tea Party. We're all here to talk about water this evening. The title of today's roundtable discussion that we'll have, and it is a packed studio, I can tell you that, is a catalyst to solve California's water divide. And the reason why it's a catalyst is because we have community values that we sit on as a group, as individuals as well. And we will be discovering what those values are that we are sharing today in tonight's discussion. This is an exploration of a Central Valley groundwater issue. That is the refilling to a sustainable level the groundwater aquifers that are present beneath the Central Valley of our state. The political parties are going to be offering up their solutions and reasons that support those ideas that they have come up with. We'll divide up the discussion into four different parts. Where and how do we inject water into those aquifers down over there? The conveyance necessary to accomplish that, the storage needs of something like this, and also the water rights ramifications, and I'm sure there will be ramifications. Now, the community values portion of this is really a very important part. The basic community values are going to be illustrated by our interactions today, by each of us in the studio, KVMR, myself, and all the political parties. We're asking you, the listeners, to rate us. Let us know on a scale from 0 to 5, 5 being outstanding, the level of respect towards one another that you hear as we discuss things today. And secondly, responsibility. You'll be rating responsibility to our California community in our discussion. Lastly, what's the perceived trust that you feel is felt between the parties here in our conversation this evening? All these things are very important. If you look at some of the other value types, we're going to be discussing sustainability, economics, certainty in our decision-making, sharing, accountability, preservation, and responsiveness. Now, we encourage you to go to the Operation Unite's Facebook page also, because we have placed up on that page the same diagrams that everybody here in the studio has in front of them. Maps of California and the Central Valley, some statistics, some graphs, things like that. You'll want to look at these things also as you listen during the next hour of time. Would like to introduce to you some of our guests here. We have Jim Firth, Democratic Party. Jim has been politically involved most of his life, always a Democrat, I understand. And he was raised, however, surprisingly, in a Republican family. So there was a transformation of some sort that happened early on. His passion is affordable housing issues, and you know why? Used to live in San Francisco, where they have a lot of homeless and other issues, and he is very passionate about doing something about that. We have Nick Wilcox, who is sharing the Democratic Party's opinions today. He's an environmental scientist, expert in water rights, worked with the State Water Resource Control Board for quite a while. He was involved in the Bay Delta program as his last position down there. And he's an NID board member, as it turns out, in the Nevada Irrigation District. Science teacher for 9 years. He's a perfect person to have here. He grew up on the other side of the state that I did, in Pennsylvania. Him in Philadelphia and me waving to him from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've got Bob Wren, Republican Party. Bob has worked in the electrical industry for a long time, thermal and solar power plants, done internationally. He understands water issues. Water issues are a very important part of that type of work, Bob. I thank you for being here. We've got Debra Wilder, Republican Party. Now, Debra has 35 years of experience as an attorney. She's really involved in working on prevailing wage issues with contractors, big companies, and she started also very early in life, at 18 or so. In fact, it was junior high school, I believe. Isn't that right, that you got cracking, Debra? It was at 18 years old that a special campaign was put together to find a new a replacement for a politician in San Leandro, who unfortunately had a fatal accident. She was involved in that activity, getting a new person involved. And then we've got Calvin Clarke, who is with the Tea Party. Now, Calvin feels that there really, truly is a domino effect of problems when you allow water to go all the way to the ocean. And so he will be chiming in on some of his concerns there. However, his birthplace was at Half Moon Bay, and enjoyed the ocean quite a bit. Back in the 60s, Dad was a deputy sheriff in those areas. Now he's involved in real estate, both project management and also, or property management, and also in buying and selling. So these are our guests tonight. Let me give you the skinny on on the Central Valley issue, and then we'll get started, okay? Groundwater in the Central Valley, California is being depleted at an alarming rate. We know that. We heard that in the news time and time again. This is critical because it's the Central Valley groundwater aquifers that are the water backup plan when surface water is not available to the state. And this part of the state, the Central Valley, provides 25% of our food. It's a very important place, and we don't want to have that area lose its productivity, that's for sure. And we know that during times of drought, even slightly below normal years, there are times when surface water flows are diminished. So we need to solve this problem down there. A goal that benefits all Californians is to support the filling of this Central Valley aquifer system to some sustainable level. We may not fill it up, but we can at least bring it up so that we can keep it at a sustainable level. And if we do not accomplish that task, we look at the vulnerability of losing a portion of our food supply that is local to California. That would not be a very good thing for our state. We need to do something in the Central Valley. Now, all of us have benefited greatly by our Governor Brown, in creating the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that was passed in September of 2014. That the goal is to manage our aquifers sustainably. In fact, the Central Valley is the poster child that helped move that particular legislation along. We're looking at things related to groundwater aquifers regarding storage, declining water levels, saltwater intrusion, even the drop in land surface, believe it or not, subsidence, water quality, and surface water-groundwater interactions that could affect ecological and create ecological impacts. To make it really easy to understand, we're talking about using less water. We're talking about storing a whole lot more water. And we're talking about expanding the flexibility of California's conveyance system so we can move water around to where it's needed. So what is important in our discussion tonight is how we choose to make our decisions. Nobody here is an expert in the Central Valley. I'm sure there are some of you listeners who are experts in the Central Valley listening in now in other areas. We are really making suggestions as possible angles to take to solve the problem, but we're focused more on what is behind those types of decisions, the value system that we all share here tonight. So the first question I have for each of you here is, it's a basic question. Define reliability in the context of Central Valley food and ecosystem sustainability. Bob, you want to start us off?
Sure. Bob Wren, a Republican Party member. Well, I chose to define it in context of water, not necessarily the Central Valley, but to me, reliability is something that is dependable, consistent, expected. In the context of water, we all turn on the water tap and we see clean, potable water flowing out. But I want to contrast that with something that's very unreliable related to water, and that's the weather patterns and the source of water to all of us in this state. So obviously some human interaction is needed between an unreliable source of water to allow us to have a reliable supply of water.
And so really you're talking about the certainty in water supply. Nick, how do you deal with the uncertainties when you're talking about defining reliability?
Well, you deal with the uncertainties essentially by storing water so that you can move water from times when there's surplus to times when there's deficit. And I'm sure that my Republican friends would agree with that. So as a director of NID, for example, we have to deal with this issue every day. Consequently, we own and maintain 10 reservoirs that have a storage capacity of 280,000 acre feet, which allows us to deliver water in the summer to our agricultural and municipal customers when the natural water system does not provide it for us.
And Cal, from your perspective, reliability, what's the most important component to that?
Well, for how many years have we had a dependable constitution that limited the powers of government, which gave free enterprise and innovation, which brought about the technology, it brought about the reliability, because private property owners are the best caretakers of their land.
And so you're saying that the certainty of the strengths given to the property owners is really a very important component to this?
Well, we see that in the management of water that's been limiting the growth of of the people by the limiting of the storage of the dams that have been built. We haven't had many dams built, and I think the last dam that was built, Nick, was back in 75 or something, wasn't it? Or before that?
It was after that.
It was after 75?
It was after that.
Which one?
There have been two major facilities built within the last 15 years. One is the Eastside Reservoir, which is an off-stream storage facility built by the Metropolitan Water District, which is critical to maintaining reliability in the Southern California service area. The Contra Costa Water District in the mid-'90s also built Los Vaqueros Reservoir, so your information is not correct.
Jim, what do you think? Jim, Democrat.
This is Jim Firth, the Democratic Party here in Nevada County. In terms of reliability, we need to fully protect all water sources from contamination and guarantee sufficient water for the basic human needs of drinking and sanitation. But more than that, we also need to look at several other elements. Implementing a comprehensive science-based water plan that includes managing each watershed, including groundwater, as a unified whole, and upgrading the Delta levee system. We need to motivate efficient, sustainable, safe use of water and hold all users accountable for their consumption, implementing and enforcing regulations regarding groundwater use, including full usage documentation, and also ensure allocation and management of water to sustain ecosystems, fisheries, recreation, and endangered species. There's a combination of needs and uses, and we have to find a balance for all of that.
So what I'm hearing you saying is there's sort of a holistic approach, which you're taking, the Democratic Party is taking, in viewing a number of different parameters, quite a number of parameters.
Yeah, I've just outlined for you the California Democratic Party platform. So, yes, there is a holistic approach.
Cal, you wanted to add something.
Well, you can look back in California history. We have an increase of population here, and a lot of people like it. And because of that and this fabricated water crisis, which 90% of Sacramento River went out to the ocean. In the Colorado, we have 90% that's not sent down, but only 10%, if it makes it, goes to the ocean. So here we have a lack of storage. We have the environmental species taking a precedence, and I'm still trying to get on that endangered species list. I think a lot of us should want to be on that.
Well, if you're down to only one or two, maybe you'll get on it.
And you know what's interesting is Obama has tried to turn over our water rights to the United Nations.
Yeah, those are. Go ahead. Actually, Debra, you have something?
Yeah, thank you. Debra Wilder. I'm the chair of the Nevada County Republican Party here. And, when people think of, when you ask them about reliability, they think about, I want to turn my shower on. I want to be able to do my laundry. I want to be able to have clean, healthy water coming out of my tap. But I think the bigger issue that I think a lot of us could agree on is the issue of sustainability. And that's what we really need to look at, because as greater populations come to California, it's going to be, we're tapping into the same water source. And unless we're expanding that, unless we're conserving water, unless we're more efficient in the use of our water, unless we're expanding our storage, we're not going to be able to continue to supply that reliability to the people who live here.
So then you're saying that to have a reliable supply requires that we have practices that will ultimately allow us to have a sustainable supply where our water quality is maintained, our water levels also are maintained at a safe, healthy, abundant level.
I think that would be true. I think the discussion comes into how is that achieved. I actually think everybody around the table would agree, Democrat, Republican, Tea Party, agrees with those three key points. The devil's in the details as to how you achieve that.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads here. I think we do agree. Let's take that next step right now. Let's look at how we decide on where we can inject waters into the aquifers in the Central Valley. And let me just throw in this piece for those of you who aren't familiar with it. UC Davis did a great study, a recharge study on the Central Valley lands. And it's both on our Facebook site, so those listeners who can open up Operation Unite's Facebook site, you'll see the diagram there. there is a diagram of California that indicates in a colored code where they found soils, sediment at the ground surface that is conducive for percolating water into the aquifers. And in a very general sense, the east side of the Sierras has more coarse material, probably from the glaciers that had lost their waters many 10,000 years ago. And then as you go westward to the western side of the Central Valley, you find more clayey, more fine silt type of materials, and it's of course more difficult to perk water in that area. Assuming that enough extra surface water is available, that's a big assumption, I know. How would you select the locations of areas that you would recharge the aquifer? Anybody want to start on that? What would be the criteria? Nick?
Well, I've worked professionally in this issue at the Water Board. Those areas that are best for recharge are old alluvial fan areas, and there are some areas in the Central Valley that are ideal for groundwater recharge projects. The Department of Water Resources undertook the groundwater bank during the drought that was in the late 80s and early 90s, using the Kern alluvial fan. For many years, they've been using the alluvial fan in the Arvin Edison area for groundwater recharge. These projects work beautifully. But essentially what you're doing with those projects is you're taking surplus surface water in years when it's available and putting it in the ground and then taking it out for delivery during dry periods. This is a very sensible and well-recognized practice. The areas, however, that are suitable for this are somewhat limited and already in use. So it's not a panacea, and it takes surface area or land to do this. And many of the lands that are used for recharge are also prime agricultural lands, so it's difficult to dedicate land for recharge, if it's passive anyway, and fallow the land for agriculture. So there are conflicts throughout this whole scenario.
So how would that be resolved? Jim, any thoughts on that?
I think you're getting a little bit ahead of the game, though, also. This is Jim from the Democratic Party. The idea of having more water underground, groundwater. How much? Where's it coming from? How much can be stored underground and in which of these aquifers? I think we need to have some analysis of where that's going to be, how much it's going to be, before we can really decide where it's going to go. And where it's going to come from is then a matter of transporting it to those locations. There's a lot of data that needs to be determined prior to really even getting into putting the water into the ground or in other storage facility.
Well, I totally concur with that, but let me just ground truth this a little bit. I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down with Felicia Marcus at the State Water Resource Control Board, and also Phil Eisenberg several years back in regards to the Delta issues. And what I was hearing from both is, there are ways to have enough water to get things done. We learn how to use less water. We conserve water. We recycle water. We reuse water. Those are our objectives. So we're making an assumption here that, just for the sake of conversation this evening, that water is available. When we start talking about water rights, I think we'll very quickly turn right into that same topic, though, Jim, and talk about those limitations.
There's a big difference between the amount of municipal use and agricultural use and environmental use, and I think we need to look at those elements. With commercial use, it's a very small percentage of the amount that can be recycled, for example.
Yeah, Bob Wren, Republican Party, and I agree with everything that's been said on this topic. And certainly we have to do more studies, but I believe there are places where we can percolate more water into the ground. Finding that water, whether it be from conservation or potentially moving more water from the north state. We have the water. The south state is who needs the water. So I think that there are many, many issues that have to be resolved and studied. But I think it is feasible. But I wanted to make one comment on conservation, because all the water agencies in the state have, over the past year, at the direction, I think, of the governor, entered into conservation measures, and those measures have actually been quite successful, to the point where some water districts are looking at raising rates for water because their revenues have dropped so much. So, I mean, there is a limit to how far conservation will go. But storing water, whether it be above ground or in the ground, I think is one of the areas we need to look at to, average this consumption of water over time because of the irregularity of the supply of that water.
I'd like to remind everyone you're listening to community-supported radio, KVMR FM, Nevada City.
Cal.
Well, we do have the basis of science is measurement. Everybody who's in this environment knows that. And when we have politicians entering into the system, creating an agenda that's centered around biodiversity, habitat management, endangered species, we end up overlooking some of the very important aspects, which are, number one, where does the water come from? Are we worthy to have rain? And does the government modify our weather? And we know that there is evidence, the SAGs, the stratospheric aerosol engineering, geoengineering. If you folks haven't heard about it, I highly recommend you do your research on it. There's hundreds of patents. And we know that this has been going on. And if you look out there this morning, you'll see, you would have seen a few streaks in the sky that determine whether or not we're going to have a high pressure or a low pressure. And this has been going on. It was on C-SPAN recently. They had a hearing in Congress about it. And this modifies our weather. And, they want to do it for resisting global warming. But in reality, it's created a lot of high pressure.
That's true. Let's gear this towards how we're going to get water into the ground. However, I mean, if we're seeding clouds, as I know there are strategies out there, of course, then we do have some more rain, some precip falling. Where do we put it into the ground? I think what Nick said really is true. We do have some very permeable areas that can be accomplished. Nick?
There are three ways to get water into the ground. You can either let it go down a stream and let it infiltrate into the groundwater. You can passively let it percolate into the ground, or you can actively inject it into the ground through injection wells. So there are only three ways to do that. The problem in California, of course, is that the water is not located where the groundwater recharge areas are and where the use is. I mean, the truth of the matter is that in California, the majority of the demand for water is south of the Delta. The majority of the supply is north of the Delta. And so therefore, in order to recharge Sacramento River water into the San Joaquin Basin, where overdraft is most severe, brings up a conveyance problem. And the conveyance facilities are limited. They're limited both in capacity, and they're limited, as Calvin alluded to, they're limited through regulatory means. So pumping is restricted due to endangered species issues, but I don't see that changing.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. This is Jim again. I don't see that changing immediately either. I think that what we're looking at embarking on is a conversation that can bring these different concepts together to look at long-term, long-range plans around avoidance of the catastrophe of future droughts. There will no doubt be future droughts. I don't believe in government conspiracies. I do believe the government can offer the facilitation to bring us together to find the solutions for recharging the aquifers, for moving water from place to place, and for guiding the kind of growth that we're going to need, both in terms of increased population and in terms of how we move forward with our agricultural economy.
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, reemphasize what's been said and say it again. I've mentioned it, that we have the water in the north and the south needs it. And so conveyance is definitely an issue. But there are years when our water rainfall is very high. And all of the environmental concerns and salinity and the Bay and Delta can be met with excess water still shipped south. I mean, those are the years, those are the opportunities when we get heavy rainfalls to capture that water, if you can convey it and if you can percolate it in the proper locations. So I think those are the areas, that's the timing when you want to do it. You want to do it when there's a heavy rainfall year. You do not want to constrain our access to water. We are the source of the water, so our interests now and in the future have to be considered whenever any of this transfer of water is done.
So then are you saying that we have to, in making our decisions, we don't want to end up cutting arms and legs off where the water's coming from? We need to seek some sort of balance.
Yeah, and I would add to that actually the California Water Code includes provisions that mandate that any projects that are undertaken assure that the location where the water originates, its present and future needs for water are met and maintained when they do the environmental impacts on any project like that. So, yes, definitely I would want to make sure we are kept in the right situation on water. So
are we talking about all the parties agreeing that being fair amongst all people, Northern Californians as well as Southern Californians, when making water decisions is a prime important aspect to achieve?
I just wanted to echo Bob's point. The areas in the North State are, at least in theory, protected through the area of origin statutes. And under the area of origin statutes, the state and federal projects cannot export water that is needed for use and development in the area of origin. And this is a very fundamental principle, and one which there are many people who would stand and die by that principle, and I'm sure Bob would agree with that.
Yeah, Bob, I would definitely agree with that, for sure.
So, given that, those of us in the North State must be constantly vigilant that we do not surrender that area of origin preference.
Yeah, and this is Jim again. I don't see that is going to happen either, Nick or Bob. But I do want to at least speak up for the fish. They don't have a real loud voice in some of this or other endangered species. So I think it is important to remember that we're not just watching out for ourselves. We're watching out for other species. We're watching out for the land, the forest. There are other components here that rely upon our good management of water resources.
Clarke with the Tea Party again. It's interesting. We want to have, management of species, but yet we see that when they did the tests of the snowpack on Mount Shasta, we found that there's 61,000 parts per billion of aluminum in the water, which is a total of about it's 4,000 times what the normal standard of aluminum is. So, and this is affecting everything we do. Everything that's getting poisoned by our water system is being poisoned by airborne aerosol aluminum. And not that that's the only issue with storage, but when you're storing and trying to protect the species that are in the streams, and you put that before humans, and you want to tear down dams, which has happened before. Not to get real serious, I think dams, some of them might be antiquated. I've been in the largest dam that was built in 1932 in the Oahe Reservoir, and there was some cracks in it. That's normal. But that's why, storage was important. With 50 miles of water that allows potatoes to be sent to California, we wouldn't have that.
So the aluminum concentrations are quite high, and I suppose aluminum, Nick, you probably know better than all of us here, is a detriment to some of the aquatic life. So it would they'd be taking a hit, I suppose. Jim, are you saying be more careful when looking at water quality?
We need to be as careful as possible when looking at water quality, but I'm not looking at managing species, as Cal has said. I'm talking about managing water. Just want to make that distinction.
Cal, you want to answer to that, and then we'll go to Bob.
Yeah, you know, when we look at this big picture of species, we also look at the California Water Board that adopted the use of chloramine in densely populated areas. Chloramine is a toxin. It's in the MSDS book on toxins, and they're using it in the 400 miles of the Hetchy water system, and it dissolves pipes. It creates collateral health damage. It violates the white blood cell amino acids. You have people dying of stroke and heart attack more often because of this, and all these acute cancers that happen. Now, that is a United Nations water treatment standard, and we're dealing with the same United Nations Agenda 21. I'm still trying to get on the endangered species list. So Cal,
we're talking about getting water into the aquifers of the Central Valley.
Exactly.
Are you saying that the surplus waters that we do end up accumulating, which may have come off the snowpack, is going to have a bad water quality, which would have to be dealt with? I think actually people are looking at those water quality manifestations.
The water system's kind of managed now by government, and they're blending sewage, ponded sewage, and San Jose just did it. Now we've got Stockton doing it. They got ponded sewage, and it's kind of gross, I think, and that's why they're using a lot of chloramine now.
Well, that's why we're talking about these things now. Bob, you wanted to?
Yeah, Bob, Republican Party. I don't think anybody on the Republican side would differ with what Jim said. We are just as concerned about the environment, and I think the main discussion here, I know we were talking about quality, but that's kind of an issue that needs to be dealt with when it's appropriate. But I think we're talking about volumes, quantity of water. When do we have large quantities that we can release to the south without jeopardizing the environment, the fish, or the salinity, and not jeopardize us as the local area where the water originates from? So those are the concerns that I have, on the quality side.
Nick?
This is Nick Wilcox, and I completely agree with Bob. He has a very, very clear handle on the issue. Now, with respect to fish, I think there's an undercurrent here that we shouldn't let any water go to the ocean. That reserving water for fish is somehow a bad thing. I would like to point out that the fish were here first. And the water quality standards that I participated in promulgating do reserve water for fish, and will continue to do so. Now, the question then is, what is the sustainable level of water needed to preserve the fishery? And those standards have been set. Currently, the Delta, which is where those standards apply, is in extreme excess conditions. And so there is plenty of water right now for diversion and for fish. The standards really set a floor on the water needed for fish, and they ensure that the fish will have enough water to survive. But alternatively, the standards ensure that the fish will always have a gigantic headache because they never get what they actually need.
Nick, there are a lot of people that feel that we're overkilling the protection of the aquatic. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people in the Central Valley and other places. I think the people in the Delta area don't feel like that so much. But what I hear in the Central Valley areas and in some of the other areas is that we are attempting to play God too much, and there isn't enough certainty in the data sets that tell us one thing over another. Now, we have problems with the pelagic fish in the Delta, for example. It's not just the Delta spelt. Not at all. That's not a bellwether type of species that we are just totally on top of. I mean, we have an issue with the salmon and what's going on there. Some of which is, they have sustained themselves through many years in all kinds of droughts where mankind wasn't even around. So, how do we maybe buffer what we do in such a manner that could, and Debra, you may have to chime in on this. How could we buffer this, the current approach to maybe free up some more of this water? If there is a graph that is on the Operation Unite Facebook page, and you guys have it in front of you too, that shows the amount of overflow outpouring water that goes out to the ocean as compared to the exported water and so forth. It's this graph in green. How do we do that?
Well, this is Debra, Nevada County Republican Party. I actually believe that we have to continue to take a long-term view of water management for humans, for wildlife, this isn't all our water to use up in our lifetime. We need to manage the water and the conservation and the environment well. But one of the things, in order to, you're talking about recharging the aquifer, but to do that, I think you also have to balance other things that need to happen to our water system in California.
Like what?
So, for example, I grew up in the Bay Area. We've got water coming out of Hetch Hetchy. Some of those pipes are 75 years old. We've got all kinds of stuff possibly leaching into the water, pipes that are tenuous at best. And so there's got to be an investment in that infrastructure. The other thing is I used to serve on the Foster City Council a couple of decades ago, and we looked at desalination, and we decided not to go with desalination because it was too expensive. And as a fiscal conservative, I'm not looking to throw money away. But over the last 15, 20 years, desalination has dropped significantly, the cost of doing that. And so as the populations on the coast, in the Bay Area and in Southern California grow, and the cost of desalination and the science increases so that the cost drops, I think that if those communities can pull their water from the ocean and desalinize it, that would allow us to use the fresh water that we get from rain and runoff to go into the aquifers and to also protect our wildlife.
San Diego's a great example. They just started a brand new desal plant. It's wonderful. Paul?
Yeah, first, I'd like to say you are listening to community-supported radio, KVMR, FM, Nevada City. Briefly, the relationship between the amount of water that it takes to preserve the fish life and the amount of water that it takes to prevent saltwater intrusion, which, Calvin, I would ask you, what are the property rights of the people who own property, farmland on the Delta, in terms of their needing to be a certain amount of water going through the Delta to prevent saltwater intrusion? Is there a clash of values there?
There is a clash of values because here, our state has basically become a United Nations state, and we follow an endangered species program that restricts and penalizes farmers, ranchers, and people, even on their private property that they're not doing commercial, over an endangered species. Case in point is the Sierra Business Council is wanting to do inventories on everybody's property. Look at their website; it's very clear, and they're out of Truckee, and that's fine, except they don't own that property. They're not paying taxes on that property, and there's no crisis except that which is created by government. And so when we take and we only say that, and I'm not only saying that the humans should take an unlimited precedence at all, but there is a balance in the ecology. There is a balance in the use of water, and when we can't eat and farmers can't farm, and we let an endangered species that can't be harvested out of the pond or out of the creek or out of the river, is it a catastrophic water crisis that we had? And who created it? And if we continue to try and solve the problem without knowing what are the powers of government that have conspired, and I'm going to use the word conspire because they've done it before, and when people find out that it's a conspiracy, like Agenda 21, where we follow the United Nations, but nobody says that. We don't want to talk about the United Nations. The Endangered Species Act is a United Nations standard.
Well, I've read the Agenda 21. I mean, there are some similarities to things that we're doing, but I wanted to make a point. We have farmers in the Central Valley, and then we have farmers in the Delta. And when we're talking about moving water away from the Delta, away from the ocean, we're essentially saying to the farmers in the Delta, well, if your water becomes saline and it ruins your crops, your row crops, that's too bad. We need water down south or wherever we need it. That's probably not the best way to go about things. The people that I've met in the Delta communities, it's a 5-county area, they're very, very reasonable. And at one point they were looking at possibly losing one third of their farming lands. So we do have to take into consideration from a people standpoint waters that are removed from the Delta region, as well as when the water falls from the sky. It's got work to do. The bell rang and it's going to start doing its work. There's all kinds of stuff that happens with that precipitation as it falls to the ground, not just serving people. but serving a lot of other things as well. Paul.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that more as a question of property rights. What are the rights of the people in the Delta to maintain enough water flow so that their property isn't destroyed? And so there could be a clash of property values here between maybe more powerful entities in big cities and those people who are in those areas.
Yeah, Bob Wren with the Republican Party. I think in the Delta region, and talking about the species of fish in that Delta, actually those two are aligned. The property rights to prevent infiltration of salt into their farmlands, and the keeping the fish healthy. Those two are aligned, but I think you said it quite right. There is a conflict between the farmers and the property rights of the Delta and the farmers and the property rights of the Central Valley in the south that may be fighting over some of the water.
This is Nick. I want to address this issue of property rights and water a little bit. And Debra, as an attorney, perhaps you can either nod or shake your head on this. I don't know if you've had water rights law. I worked in the Division of Water Rights, the State Water Board, for many years, and I'm familiar with water rights. There are not private property rights to water in California. Water, according to the state constitution, belongs to the people, to the state, and the state has the right or the duty to essentially parcel out rights to the use of that water. So you do not own water. You just have temporary rights to the use of water. So this is what's called a usufructuary right. You can maintain that right so long as you use that water beneficially, and if you cease using that water beneficially, you lose the right to that water. So that's how water rights work. In California, we have a hybrid system of water rights law. We have actually 4 separate water rights systems operating simultaneously, but I'll only mention 2. One is the appropriative water rights system, and the other is the riparian rights system. So you have to think about this issue in the context of those water rights systems that are operating.
So if we jump into the water rights end of things, how are we going to deal with this? We have the Groundwater Sustainability Management Act, which means everything's got to be sustainable. That's encouraging us to get some water into the ground somehow, because the problem, as I understand it, if you look at the history of the Central Valley, is they were using groundwater wells, and then they realized, oh my God, look what's happening. The land is dropping, and we're declining water levels. And suddenly the federal projects kicked in, the state projects eventually kicked in. It brought water into the region, which caused us to have less pumping. And then also the added benefit was the leakage through the bottom of a lot of the ditches and canals and rivers and streams and things like that ended up recharging the aquifers, and we started looking really great again. And then we started developing the Central Valley so much more that we ended up not only using the surface water that was available, but also the groundwater too, because in some cases groundwater became the primary source of water for those farms. And now we're at the same endpoint. So we've got to deal with the appropriative rights issues of water rights in surface water, and then we're going to be dealing with these more riparian groundwater rights, which is the overlying groundwater right. And I think we're at a clash point here.
The agricultural community in California, and there are community farms, there is agribusiness, and they are in conflict oftentimes over the use of water and how much and who gets to use how much. I think part of what we need to do, since, as Steve has said, is to look at this 25% of the food that's consumed comes from California, consumed how far and how wide, and what kind of food is produced in California. I think that's part of the equation that we need to look at as a community and determine whether or not we are producing the correct foods given the resources that we have available to produce that food. I mean, there are some that may use less water than others and some that may use more water than others, and we need to have a conversation, or have part of the conversation be what's best overall for the state of California.
Jim, that's a very good point. If we're talking about imported water, coming from my Pennsylvania background, we have to be frugal at times. And so I would think if it's imported water, maybe we should. It's really up to discussion. Really, we have to have the Central Valley farmers involved in that discussion. But where we have that kind of limitation, would it be okay to grow any crops, any desired crops, or should we be more selective on those crops that have a low evapotranspiration rate, and also have better irrigation practices?
This is Debra. I want to jump in for a second because I have a fair number of friends that are farmers in the Central Valley, and a lot of them in the last couple of years have frankly chosen not to grow just because they cannot get water. I think you need to look at the bigger picture. They're not putting food on the table. They're certainly maybe not even making ends meet. But the other thing is for some of the crops, it's not easy to say, well, I'm not going to plant potatoes this year. If you've got an orchard, you've put years into that orchard. Orchards take a lot of water. You don't water 1 year, you lose the entire orchard. So there's a lot of balancing that has to come into this discussion about what crops get grown, who gets water, who doesn't get water when you're talking about farming.
Yeah.
In my discussions, you have to have the people of the Central Valley involved in those issues. They know what's best, what can be grown on their properties, and they're the only ones that really can come up with those answers. So how do you motivate them to do such a thing? Jim?
I agree. They do know what grows on their property. Whether they know what's best to grow on their property, I think, is a scientific equation. And I agree with Debra. I think that it is important that we have that involvement from the folks who are in the Central Valley and other areas where there are farmers growing crops, so that we can see how to create the balance and to provide good science into the development of the food that we need to eat now and into the future. I think we need to be looking at this, as a 20, 30, 50-year project. It's not something that's going to be solved overnight.
Yeah, Bob here. I just wanted to point out that there is a certain amount of crop selection that's occurring already, and I'll use this example. In the North Valley area, a lot of rice is grown. That's a high water-intensive crop. And, we have the water in the north of the Delta. You'll very rarely find, if ever, any rice being grown in the South Central Valley. So that's an example where availability of water and perhaps cost of water help a farmer decide what crops to grow.
Tell me this, Debra and Bob. If ultimately somebody's asking the Central Valley farmers to change their crop that they're growing, and that's going to cost them a huge amount of money because they need a different type of irrigation process, and a lot of other things have to be changed, they're going to need financial support of some kind. We can't just ask them to just say change and that's it. They may not be in a position that they can financially handle this. How could a decision be supported with financial benefits that will allow them to make this change and not destroy the family?
Well, first thing, this is Debra. First thing, I don't think the government should be involved in telling a farmer what they should grow or not grow. Farmers are not stupid. They're interested in putting down a crop that'll be profitable, a crop that'll be sustainable for them. And most farmers I know are also very concerned about the environment. So I don't think they're going to purposely choose a particularly bad crop, but I don't think the government has got any place in telling a farmer, you're going to grow potatoes and you're going to grow strawberries.
I'm not suggesting that, only that if a decision is made somehow by somebody, they're going to need some financial help. Paul and then Nick.
Yeah, recalling of one of my favorite little passages from the Bible is that men come and go, but earth abides. And if indeed we are going through, I said if, because I'm not going to commit myself to that, we are going through a climate change where California becomes a much more arid state as it had been in times in the past. If indeed that happens, decisions are going to have to be made by the farmers themselves. And let me take a story that I lived in the Fair Oaks area for many years, and Fair Oaks is where it is, and there's Citrus Heights and there's Orange Vale. Okay, where did they get their names? Those were real estate developments in the 1880s that came in there, divided up a whole bunch of land, found that, my goodness, oranges grow really well here. And they sold a bunch of 20, 50-acre farms, 10-acre farms, and to people, and by golly, it was just great. For years and years and years, the oranges came, the lemons came, and everything was just, everybody was making a whole lot of money. Well, 1928, my year may not be exactly right, there was the Great Freeze, and it's the freeze that happens like once every 100 years or something. Killed them all. And that was it. That was the end of it. And that was the end of that experiment. I mean, time is its own revelations and things. And I guess it's just the farmers do have to make those decisions. But in that case, they had no choice.
This is Nick. I'd like to put in a pitch here for water marketing. And this is something that my Republican friends would probably agree with. Basically, water follows market forces. And in the Sacramento Valley, where you have a lot of low dollar value crops that are irrigated or raised with relatively inexpensive water, what we're seeing to kind of balance out water across the state is that in those areas, those farmers on an annual basis may decide that it is far more lucrative to fallow their land and sell their water to farmers in the south, in the San Joaquin Valley, where water is in short supply and has a higher dollar value. And there is a lot of water marketing going on now, and that is a long-term solution, if not a total solution, to our water issues.
You know, Australia has done wonderful things with water. These water markets, they have prioritized the type of water. I think what I had heard is 4 categories. Environment gets it first. You have to have the conduit forward. It's not flowing. Environment's first, then is critical needs. We're not built that way in our infrastructure. And then after that, it's those people are willing to pay a big buck to have more certainty in receiving their water. And after that, it's just general water. And that seems. I hope our state looks at those types of things. There may be some benefits in that, in how we, in some more subtle ways on how we can operate here. Bob?
Yeah, Bob here. I would just agree totally with what Nick just said, that the marketing of water, setting pricing according to what the actual cost of the water is an excellent way for farmers to make decisions. What does that do to the cost of food? We are in a market situation. If water is scarce, the pricing will be higher. I'd like to see on wet years, that the pricing drops. And the market that does exist in California, as you mentioned, Nick, there is a large market of buying and selling water rights. Those prices have gone up and down according to the wetness of the year and the availability of excess water. So I believe that is an excellent approach.
I would just make one correction on that. You're not buying and selling water rights. You're buying and selling water. Rights are forever. And so, we sit on our rights and we save them.
Yeah, this is Bob. No, I agree with you. I said rights. It is physical water.
Yeah. So just to give you an example, last year was a critically dry year. An acre-foot of water on the open market went for at least $700 an acre-foot. And, of course, I sit as a director on Nevada Irrigation District, and we did not raise our rates. And a 2 or 3 miners inch customer pays about $28 an acre-foot for water. We actually altered our operational practices last year to cause a savings of about 10,000 acre-feet of water. We could have sold that water on the open market for about $7 million.
That's pretty incredible. Well, in the year 2015, with such a deficit, I can see how it was so financially worth doing. How many acre feet did that represent?
10,000.
That was 10,000. Oh, okay.
Steve, I'm going to interject just very briefly. The time, it's about 5 to 7. If everybody's in agreement, we could go till about 7:15. Does that sound good to everyone? I can make that decision. And
We could easily go all night on this issue.
We certainly can. Well, let's try 7:15 and see where we stand on that. And we'll just preempt everything, and we'll just kick them out if they come in.
Okay, let's one more topic here, and then we're gonna start discussing our common community values. Let's talk about the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. It's unusual for a state to actually use an inland estuary of such importance and uniqueness as part of our conveyance system from north to south. And obviously, there are many issues related to the ecology, the ecological environment, and our need for moving water down south. Being that we have 2/3 of our water coming down in Northern California, but 2/3 of us live in Southern California, a bit off, I would say, to the least. How would you define the balance that one would take in protecting both mankind's interests and the environment? How's that shake out? What's that going to look like? Who would like to start that one?
Well, Bob is pointing at me. This is Nick. I'm happy to address that issue. It's always a conflict. I mean, there are sort of three main uses of water in the Bay Delta. There are environmental uses, there are agricultural uses, and there are industrial and commercial uses. And so you're always trying to balance those uses. Under California law, the consumptive uses of people actually have priority. However, when you come to the water quality standards for the Bay Delta, what you're doing in effect is giving a priority to the fish so that they get their base needs met before other people take water. And there's a reason for doing that, and that is that the fish have to rely on water in the streams to survive. People have other types of water available to them, like groundwater and water that's in storage. So fish get priority, but they do not get priority to lead a good life. They get priority to survive, and that's an important thing to remember.
How do you balance that, though, when Central Valley farming communities, which are growing our food, don't get enough water?
Well, basically the way it's been balanced over the last year is that Central Valley farmers have had their water allocations cut to zero, and so they've been drilling wells at a furious rate and borrowing on groundwater. Groundwater is a great source to tide you over in times of drought. You cause overdraft, and the system begins to fail. What we have been doing over the last 2 years is hitting the groundwater resource too hard and causing subsidence in the Central Valley, which is a collapse of the aquifer, which leads to permanent losses in aquifer storage capacity.
Paul.
Yeah, you are listening to community-supported radio, KVMR, FM, Nevada City, KCPC, Camino Placerville. The time is 7 o'clock, and we're going to go for another 15 minutes or so on this project.
Yeah, Bob here, and thank you, Nick, for starting us off. I pointed to you because I know you have a lot of expertise in this area. One of the things I want to focus on is to better understand, Nick, perhaps you can explain it to us, why you mentioned earlier that today there's a huge amount of water flowing through the delta, so the fish are really happy. The salinity is being pushed out to some extent. How can we capture more of this water, and what does it take to actually capture it and move it into those areas where we can recharge the basins? We can recharge a basin any month of the year. It's not when you're using water for irrigation. They can be recharged in the winter, in the summer, spring, fall. So I guess I wanted to ask a question of you, if you can address it at the appropriate time. How can we actually capture more of that wasted water?
Well, you can pump harder. You can export more water from the delta. The state and federal pumps have a combined pumping capacity of about 14,000 cubic feet per second. They're not pumping anywhere close to that now. So then the question, of course, is what is restricting the pumping at the moment? And the answer to that is that the standard that was established in one of the biological opinions for Delta smelt restricts the flows in the old and middle river channels to negative 5,000 CFS. So in other words, the pumps in the Delta are so large that they have the ability to pump the rivers backwards. And so the standard that's in place that is controlling operations right now is the old and middle river standard. And they have been pumping at about negative 4,000 CFS. Part of the problem is that the rains we've been getting have not been evenly distributed throughout the state. So the North State has received much more precipitation than the mountains in the San Joaquin Valley. So although Sacramento River flows are in excess of 60,000 cubic feet per second, flows in the San Joaquin are less than 2,000 cubic feet per second. And so that restricts the amount of pumping that can take place.
So this is Jim again. So that you know, the California Democratic Party supports best practices and best practice efforts to increase agricultural use of irrigation systems that use less water, that groundwater use be regulated to prevent environmental and economic disaster, that watershed protection and, where possible, restoration be a priority. That's how we want to see our agricultural communities survive. Debra brought up a point earlier about desalinization. And again, with the coastal communities and the commercial use, and since humans have a priority in California, the science of desalinization is getting better. And I think as we're looking out into the long term, we need to utilize that science and utilize that resource, the ocean, to be able to replenish what may not be available in the long term through transportation of fresh water from the north to the south, if that's where the population continues to grow.
Yeah, there is definitely growth in California, and there's also the growth of government with public-private partnerships, collectivism, and this is just a plan that's been around for a long time with the history of the socialist communistic movement that economically destroys the rights of the people. Klamath Basin is a case in point on that, where the fish came first, the people lost their farms, they became collectivist farms or gathered up by a monopoly. We've seen how estate and tax planning and taxes and the estate tax that happened that destroyed most of the agriculture in the Central Valley when families died.
I'm not quite sure what that has to do with water.
Well, it has to do with the taxes that come from water, because people were making it into a crisis, so they want to put meters on our wells. They want to tax us about it. It's happening over in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County. So you can go check it out. Don't take my word for it, but it's already happening, where they flew over this summer and they fined people who had green lawns. And why is government going that far and then they don't go back? They take 2 steps forward in increasing the power and size of government, and they only take maybe a half a step back.
You know, I think the reason why they did that is we're all in it together. Unless you're in those particular areas and say, well, you know, I'm above the law and I'm going to go ahead and do it anyhow. We share the resource of water, and a lot of money goes into distributing it. And so if we all have, if we have to cut down, all of us have to cut down to some degree.
Well, you know, they announced that the Hetch Hetchy is 160% of its capacity. So they should stop all of those restrictions. It was in the news today. If the news is wrong, Nick, I'm sorry, but you have to listen to KNCO.
It can't be 160% of its capacity, because then it would be overflowing.
Well, then we're wrong.
It may be 160% of normal for the date. Yes.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Debra. Let me jump in on this thing, because I do think that sometimes government is overreaching on the funding. And I'll give you a prime example. My sister lives in the Bay Area, and when they take a shower, they put a little timer on. They have a bucket in the shower. They collect the water in the shower, and they go out and they water their yard with a shower. So they have a green yard. But I would bet you that they're probably using less water than their neighbors. So you can't use an arbitrary decision of, oh, you've got green lawn and you don't. You've got to look at the overall consumption that's being used, because if people are going to be conservative and efficient in their use, they should not be penalized for it.
No, I totally agree with that. It's how we divide it up. And, I think it was recognized early on that the way it was put to, that we reduced 36%, some areas a little less, some areas as much as 36%, that was tough in those areas that have high evaporation rates, high temperatures. And there are other factors. So we'll come up with better ways. But the idea is we share in the pain. Because if we all share in a pain, it'll be a little pain. It won't be a big pain. Nick and then Cal.
I want to return to Deborah's point on desal, which I think is a great point, and how desal relates to groundwater specifically. Orange County has been able to stabilize their groundwater basins largely by desalinating their highly treated wastewater. The problem with injecting wastewater into the ground for recharge is that wastewater has a higher dissolved solids content than raw water. And if you engage in that practice over the long term, the dissolved solids content of the groundwater becomes unusable. But if you knock down the dissolved solids of the water even a little bit, it makes it sustainable to inject it in the ground and maintain your groundwater basins. So desalinization is not the panacea. It is very expensive and highly energy intensive. But when you do what they're doing in Orange County and desalinate a little bit and then use that for recharge, it has the ability to bring groundwater basins into balance, which speaks exactly to the point that Steve is raising.
Are there technologies where you use sunlight? Could they use sunlight in the Central Valley to develop desal? And would that volume that's produced be large enough to be significant?
Well, that's how they've been doing it on desert islands for years.
I mean, we're talking about a huge deficit, though, in the Central Valley aquifers.
No, it's not feasible.
I don't think I don't think the science is there yet. And like I said, when I first started looking at desal as a possible solution, not for everything, but for part of the situation, the cost was just way through the roof. It's gotten better, but it's still very, very expensive. I think as science and technology progresses, it will get less expensive and become more viable. But I don't think we're going to be able to do it with sunlight in the Central Valley.
Well, we're sitting at about $1,000 an acre foot for desal now, and we're up against physical limitations of energy. So desal is tied directly to the cost of energy. And if energy is getting more expensive, then desal will become more expensive. It is something to look at. It is absolutely needs to be part of the mix.
Bob here, I just wanted to say that I agree with what you said, Nick. The cost is not going to come down very much. We are up against some technical limitations. I've been involved with desalination projects 20 years ago and so forth. But what will change, I think, is that the cost of water will rise, so that desalination cost will start to be competitive with the true cost of water once that's actually factored in into the pricing.
Yeah, I agree with Bob, too. I think that when I was looking at desalinization about a decade ago, we weren't talking about an acre feet. It came down to a glass of water would cost you about 25 cents.
I totally agree with Bob's point. So we have agreement there.
Paul here. I did a story just last week interviewing a landscape contractor here in town. And his business is booming right now, and with people who are concerned that their wells cannot sustain their lifestyle that they've had in the past with large lawns. And his business is booming, converting people's property to using native plants. And so there is a way that I think, Cal, that the marketplace does... technology in the marketplace does Absolutely. Cure certain things. And I know that Australia had to go through an entire change of lifestyle in order to cater to the fact that they were going to have less water. And
the fish are going to have it, the crops might have it, but humans are again, not sustainable. We use this word very lightly, like we're sustainable, but not according to the United Nations and not according to a lot of the laws that are written in California that pertain to putting our crops second and our humans second, namely the chemical treatments that are being added to our water. I mean, they got rid of fluoride in Humboldt County, and they ought to do it here, or Del Norte County. They ought to get rid of fluoride. They ought to get rid of some other chemicals. The quality of the water is as important as water itself.
Yeah, go ahead, Debra.
Yeah, I wanted, where our time is almost up, and one of the things I wanted
We've just extended ourselves. We have about 15 more.
All right,
minutes.
well,
12, 13. I don't know.
we're rolling towards the end of it. And one of the things I wanted to point out to the listeners, which maybe they don't hear very often, is that if you've heard all the people talk around the table, the Democrats, Republicans, the Tea Party, you see that there's a lot of agreement that everybody around the table cares about the environment. Everybody around the table cares about the farmers and sustainability and all those things. And I think where we differ is, in what that solution is going to be, who's going to dictate that, what's it going to cost. But I think it's important for the listeners to understand that, one party or the other is not necessarily the devil, and really that everybody cares about the earth and the water, and what we need to do is we need to work together towards common solutions.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. What are the values, if you are to list them now, that we really do have in common? And I'll throw one out there. I hear everybody talking sustainability. We want to be able to handle ourselves and have water today as well as in 10 years and for our grandkids in 100 years. What other values do you think we have in agreement, Cal?
Well, certainly we are beneficiaries of an inheritance that was bought by blood of patriots. Namely, we have a limitation on government because of the law, because we were endowed by our Creator. We created a law that limited the powers of government to avoid monopolies.
Okay, but I'm asking, what is the value that we share amongst all of us here, Republicans, Democrats, and Tea Party?
Well, I think we have inherited some liberty, and we've inherited maybe a lot of tyranny, and I think we might all agree on that.
I think you're missing the point here, Cal. What Steve's asking is, where we see commonality in solutions.
Okay.
And is the ability of our conversation here, and I think Debra picked up on it perfectly, that we could sit down, we could look at what we need to do in terms of conservation. We need to look at what we can do in terms of storage of water, how we can find the balance of uses between, the three primary needs of water for the environment, for agriculture, and for humans. And I think that's when we have the data that is necessary looking forward to make those decisions. Like that, I hope that's one of the values that we share, is that we're able to look at the scientific data and say, here's what's anticipated to be taking place over the next 20, 30 years, and here are solutions that can address some of those future situations.
Yeah, this excuse me. This is Bob. One of the values listed we're looking at is called accountability, and actually I want to talk about accountability in accounting. And what I mean by that is, having accurate cost estimates for citizens and politicians to make the right decisions. And time again, I've seen estimates for these big type of projects that might be involved to move more water, whether it's modifying the delta pumps or the peripheral tunnel project that's being advocated. Usually the early cost estimates that are used to get buy-in by the public and so forth prove to be very low in reality. So we really need to have accountability in accounting. That was one of the values I wanted to throw into the discussion.
What about preservation? Preservation of our historic lifestyles as a farmer in the Central Valley, and also the preservation of life in the Delta itself. Cal.
Yeah, this is Cal with the Tea Party. To preserve our way of life means that we have to have balance, which means we have to have more responsibility. And with more responsibility, then we can have less government. And that is probably the only way to get less government, is for us to be worthy of a better government than one that's ran by the United Nations and wants to bomb everybody. We want to have our farmers. We want to let other countries have their farmers. By interrupting our farmers in our local valley because of a fish. Okay, but back to commonality. Okay, we want more responsibility, and then we can have less government. And hopefully we'll be deserving of being a neighbor that's worthy to be controlled by our own individual choices, by our agency, because we choose to do the right thing to our other neighbors, and then we don't allow government to do something to our neighbor that we can't do to our neighbor.
My neighbor would have a difficult time replacing the tunnels that go from Hetch Hetchy to the San Francisco Bay Area. I think government certainly has a place in our society and is a necessary component of our society. The infrastructure around the conveyance of water throughout the state of California, we cannot individually bear the cost of that. We need to come together as a community to bear that responsibility. There are many, many other elements of our society that require and rely upon government just to make sure they happen. To Bob's point, however, we do need to be realistic. If you're going to start doing something that you don't have a plan for, especially if it's something that you're planning for 20 years out, there will need to be adjustments, but sometimes there are just unknowns, and you have to have accommodation for that.
Would that accommodation be a value of responsiveness to whatever choices we do make? For example, we don't know how the weather's going to come. In fact, I spoke to a NOAA climatologist or weather person. He told me that, we're good at 2 or 3 day predictions. We're okay with 5, but we're 10% above chance for anything after that. We don't know that much.
Well, there's a substantial difference between weather and climate, I have to point out. We don't know what the weather is going to be 5 days from now, but we know from data that the climate is changing. It is getting warmer. We have less snowpack. These are fundamental issues that figure into water resource planning. From my perspective as an NID director, these issues are of extreme concern to us because we rely on snowpack for our prime storage reservoir, and as we lose that, we find that we need to replace that storage with other means of storage. But I'd like to backtrack for a second. Our nation was built primarily on resource extraction. We settled a virgin land, and frontiers were limitless, and we pushed west every time we exhausted our resources. We have now changed. We're in an age of limits, and so sustainability is a much, much more critical issue for us now than it has been historically. So when it comes to water or any other resource, we have to live within our means. We all have budgets. We all run households, and we cannot spend beyond our means.
And I think we have to share what budget items we have with one another, since water is a shared resource. Cal.
Not all truth is of the same value. Absolutely, we need to be concerned about water if there's a crisis. But to understand history and why crises are created, sometimes on purpose, and we need to and I think we're all unified in the idea that, the basis of science is measurement. It's just who's going to do the measuring and then interpreting the measurements, which is the scariest part of smart metering and putting, regulations on wells and monitoring everybody so well that pretty soon you're taxed a little more, just as we are now if you use more municipal water. I mean, there's places that are getting fees because of the sewage plant that they had to upgrade because somebody created a crisis, like up in Del Norte County. There's crises created all the time. So I think the solution is let's unwind a lot of the regulations that are meaningless. And you can't do it when our government, California, has created regional areas. They have the Regional Bay Area, which is part of the United Nations. There's restrictions on so many things now to an agency that can fine you that doesn't have due process. It's not regulated by the branches of government. So, within our structure, we have also nonprofits that get funded to monitor your property. Case in point, the Sierra Business Council, and then they present those information and data to your local Nevada County supervisors, who then in turn feel like, oh, this is a crisis. We need to photograph the 55,000 parcels of Nevada County, and we need to make habitat management, vegetation ordinances, and regulation of biological inventory of the endangered species. This happened in 2001. Where does it stop? Are we in unity to think that we are now going to be like Al Gore was in 1968 and say, oh, the sky is falling, we have a deep freeze coming, and the Ice Age movement kicked off in 1968. So then he got on the global warming movement later on, and then you had the United Nations get behind it, you had ICLEI, International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, and you had people at the UN in 92 saying there's too many people on the earth.
Oh, I hear you, Cal. There is our limitations to science. We know that. And so we have to work within the uncertainties. A part of any scientific approach is a trial and error sort of behavior. And so there are times when we do overkill it, I'm sure. But the structures, many a time that are put together have most of the time, not all the time, I agree, but most of the time are put together in a fashion that we're trying to make sure we all have the resource, not that we're focused on getting it taken away.
Steve, I want to mention one of our resources that we have to deal with tonight is time. And with that resource in mind, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, very good. Debbie, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I was looking at shared values and responsiveness, and one of the things, Nick talked about budget, and it made me create an analogy in my head, which I think the viewers might, or the listeners might appreciate, and that is, when you're putting together a budget, you also put aside money for the emergency or the rainy day, or you put it in your savings account for something future. So I think when we're talking about managing water, you can't assume that what happened 10 years ago is going to continue to happen today. Because you're going to have wet years, you're going to have dry years, you're going to have things that change. And I think that what's happened in the past is that we have not been as responsible maybe as we need to be in saying, okay, let's make sure that we're planning for that rainy day, for knowing that we will have, again, drought years, and we need to be more proactive. The governor's bill had very specific things about creating more storage and getting that storage built, and that still seems to be a long way off. So I would want us all to be proactive in looking forward and making sure that additional storage is built so that we can move forward.
There are things that are certain. This is Jim again from the Democratic Party. Our population is growing. It has been growing for a long time. The projections are it will continue to grow. We will continue to need more food. We will continue to need places to live. We will continue to need places to recreate. We will continue to need more water. I think that's fairly certain. I think Debra's right. We need to look at how we're going to acquire and hold on to the water that we are fortunate enough to receive, and then use in a balanced way. I mean, that's the only way, in my mind, that we're going to be able to move forward as a society.
Well, it sounds like, for the most part, that we actually have quite a bit of agreement within this group, which is very nice to actually experience as compared to my time listening to many of the other media outlets over the last several months. We're just about out of time, and so it's time for our listeners to go ahead and rate the interactions on this show. I'm calling this the Golden Triangle of Values. So the three values of the Golden Triangle are to rate all of us here at the studio, the political parties, Republicans, Democrats, and Tea Party, and also Paul and myself. And you're going to look at respect towards each other. That'll be a number from 0 to 5, 5 being outstanding, and 0 meaning, oh my God, I didn't even see it there. Responsibility to our California community will be the second number. Third number will be the perceived trust felt between our political groups here tonight. Go to the Operation Unite's Facebook page and go ahead and dial in, give us your poll, or you can email me. Say it again. Okay. You can email me at stevebaker@operationunite.co, or go to the Operation Unite Facebook page so that we can hear your polls. We will distribute, once we tally it all up, we will distribute it back to KVMR, KNCO, Union, and anywhere else that we'll probably pitch at quite a few places. Anyhow, we want to do that to let the listeners' voices be heard. There's a reason why we named this roundtable discussion tonight a catalyst to solve California's divide. And it's because our political parties are highly visible and have an opportunity to display the community values that all of us hold very nearly and dearly. Sometimes we don't identify them very well, though. But we are in this together. I think we've actually demonstrated that quite well tonight. It comes down to remembering who we are as a community. Common community values are not to be forgotten. So thanks to everybody for being here tonight. And also, good luck to each of you on our up-and-coming elections this year. I wish you the best. So what do you do when there are water decisions to be made in the community? I think we work together. That's the name of the game, regardless of the parties. We work together. We uphold the process through demonstrated common community values. We've demonstrated that tonight also. This drought that we just came through, I think we're looking shiny and wonderful right now, at least up here in Northern California. I'm feeling good about it. We do have a snowpack that I'm wondering about, but everything else looks wonderful. It's going to be reoccurring. Drought is going to be very familiar to all of us. So let's get it done. Let's help the Central Valley farming communities. We all eat food. Food represents water. We need to do something there. Thank you to KVMR, Paul.
Thank you, Steve, for organizing this, and thanks to all of you for being our guest here this evening. It was a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed it.
Thanks to the Republican Party, Debra Wilder, Bob, Aaron, Democratic Party, Jim Firth, Nick, thank you so much. Tea Party, Calvin Clarke, thank you so much. Photographer, who's been lurking here and there and everywhere, Cal McKittrick, we thank you so much for volunteering your time. Aida and my wife for running Operation Unite's Facebook page. And Sarah Rode, who has quietly been keeping our whiteboard in here, keeping us organized as to what those values are that we all represent. And Richard Miller for supporting the studio this evening. Remember, we will always have water working together. Good night, everybody.